It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. 3. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo Dor Jr., your host, and I'm with my friend Emerson Green. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, so I'm the host of Walden Pod and Counter Apologetics. Counter Apologetics just kind of does what it says on the label there. I just kind of talk about philosophy of religion and things, kind of a more informal look at what philosophers of religion say. And Walden Pod is sort of what I started to talk about, everything else that I'm interested in outside of philosophy of religion. Mostly it's about consciousness, but occasionally we talk about, politics or cultural stuff. But yeah, those are my main interests, just philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Well, I guess in your podcast, right? Like you have guests, or is it mainly just stationary host, and you discuss different things at different times? Like how what do you guys do there?
It's just me. Most of the episodes are just me talking about one subject for like a short amount of time. Like recently I talked about epiphenomenalism, why I think it's false. I also talk about, usually it's just me, and sometimes I bring on a guest and it'll be like a conversation. Like I recently brought on my friend Micah Edvinson to talk about socialism. I'll be talking to Philip Goff about religious fictionalism tomorrow. But usually it's just me. I'll pick like one subject, like the fine-tuning argument or something, and then just kind of go through some quick responses to something like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. So I want to ask you, are you an atheist or are you theist or agnostic? Like, what would be your position on God's existence?
So I'm an atheist and a naturalist. So I think God doesn't exist, but I also don't believe in any supernatural. Like usually I call myself a naturalist because it entails atheism, but it also kind of gets across that, I'm sort of skeptical of like ghosts and, other supernatural things that atheists might believe in, but I'm not really inclined to that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess, I don't usually start this way, but I want to ask you, in terms of your moral framework, right? Like when you decide whether or not something is desirable or good or evil or wrong, what are your actions, and how do you decide whether this is right or wrong? Mm-hmm. Is it an intuitional, or do you have like a guide or specific rules like utilitarianism, harm principle? How do you decide?
Well, ethics is not really one of my main areas. I honestly haven't thought that deeply about it. I have some things to say, like I'm a moral realist, I think there's a fact of the matter. Like, I think that there can be moral reasons that like factor into moral decision making. I think I endorse irreducibly normative truths, and I think that those are sort of, well, let me back up for a second. I think that my starting point for moral questions has to do with sentience and consciousness and the ability to suffer. So in that way, I'm kind of a utilitarian. Like John Stuart Mill said about animals, the question is not whether they can reason or talk or anything like that, it's whether they can suffer. So that's sort of always been my moral starting point, I guess, is just thinking about the suffering and flourishing of conscious creatures. And I think that that's where moral questions ultimately come to an end, is intrinsically valuable states of consciousness or states of consciousness that are intrinsically bad. So that naturally leads to a sort of utilitarianism, but I'm not really committed to utilitarianism in like applied ethical circumstances. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea for people to consciously try to be utilitarians. Like, I think the utilitarian thing to do would be to not teach people to try to reason like utilitarians, because we just don't have information about the consequences of our actions. So utilitarianism can sadly be used to justify all kinds of horrible things because we just don't know about the actual consequences of our actions and laws and so forth. So I tend to advocate, I guess, sort of more of a rule-based applied ethics, which can be justified by utilitarian considerations ultimately, but yeah. So that's not really getting into my meta ethics, but yeah, normatively, I'm sort of a utilitarian.
But how would you define the rule-based, I guess, morality? What are the rules there?
Minimize suffering, maximize flourishing, because those things are intrinsically good. Like, suffering is bad in virtue of how it feels. Like, there's no other reason why suffering is bad. That's where the moral chain ends. And, something like, a good state of consciousness is just intrinsically good. It's just good in virtue of how it feels.
Can you define what suffering is, right? Like, is it just physical harm? Or could it be something like a mental state? What is suffering?
Yeah, I mean, I think all suffering is mental in that sense. Like, we can talk about like physical pain and so forth, but it's all experienced. So I think that, it's all like experiential.
Okay, would you say, so for example, like, is will or agency included in your moral framework? Like, for example, if I were murdered, right, but I was not in pain whatsoever, I was not aware that I was murdered or whatnot, like, would I be, and there was no suffering at all there, so would there be I guess, like, would that be wrong, or would there be anything wrong in what happened to me if in that case?
Yeah,
because
I think that I think it would be wrong because you'd be depriving someone of pleasurable experiences, and you'd be going against their will. So this is where sort of the rule utilitarianism comes out, where we can't constantly just be doing these moral calculations. I think it's pretty obvious that a society where we forbid things like murder is just going to lead to better outcomes than the opposite society. So we can derive these rules based on utilitarian principles, even if we're not just walking around like trying to calculate utility in our everyday lives.
I guess that there's also we cannot deny the correlation between politics and economics with morality, right? So can you describe for me what your, I guess, ideal political system would be for you? Like, is it socialist, a sort of socialist, or you more of on the Republican side, like with capitalism and neoliberalism? What's your take?
Well, I've been trying really hard not to think about politics for the last couple months because it's too depressing. But yeah, I'm a socialist. I mean, I've been a socialist for, I don't know, since 2015 or so. Yeah, I mean, I think that capitalism has created lots and lots of wealth and prosperity, and I think that it's time that we transition to a more sustainable system that can kind of divvy up those spoils and create a society that, is not kind of eating itself, which our society just seems to be on this like destructive path right now. Like, I think that radical political action is necessary just to, to keep this basic human project going. And like I said, I think that capitalism it's done, it's create every Marxist is like there are a lot of misconceptions about Marxism and socialism, but capitalism has created all this wealth and all this wonderful advancement. But the thing is, like, it can't keep going like this. I mean, not to invoke like an artistic depiction, but I just rewatched Avatar actually, and they have to go into space to keep mining, resources from other planets, and they mention in the movie like there's no more green on Earth, like there's no more nature, like we just kept taking natural resources, and when we ran out of natural resources, we didn't think, maybe we should create a more sustainable system that doesn't rely on endless growth. And they were like, no, we'll just go into space and keep doing what we're already doing. So yeah, I think that we need to, like here in the United States, like we have an immensely wealthy, like 1% and 0.1% that essentially control the government. And, we functionally are not a democracy. And I think that many of our political problems come down to the fact that we're not really in a very democratic system. So I'm more of like a libertarian socialist. Like I want there to be a sort of bottom up, worker control over capital goods, democratic control. And yeah, I think that can go hand in hand with more like public ownership of of capital goods and, the means of production. So that way decisions can be made to maximize like human flourishing rather than maximizing profits, because I think that there's a conflict between those things. Like I think there's a conflict, it's particularly obvious at this moment, there's a conflict between, the goodness of human life and the profit motive, and maintaining our basic system where there can be immense wealth while people, are dying of preventable diseases in the richest country on earth. So yeah, I think that we need to transition to a more democratically run economy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In terms of like how your rule-based morality works with your socialism, do you feel that there's at least some contradiction, right? Because when you refer to like the scenarios in morality, there are things that require practicality too, right? Because in order to maximize well-being, you have to make the decisions that actually are effective, right? And in terms of effectiveness, like in politics and economics, capitalism and I guess being like just being business minded and competitiveness and individualism, that's what's actually that's where people thrive. That's the system where people actually work harder. What would you say on this?
I don't really see the conflict with the rule-based morality and socialism. Yeah, I mean, it's true that, capitalism, I mean, specifically, it sounds like you're talking about markets there. And, I'm in favor of planning to some extent. But, I'm kind of flexible on the question of markets versus planning. What I'm really concerned with is, like, democratic control over capital goods, like having workers get to have a say about, what to produce, where to produce, how to produce, rather than just private control over those decisions. A handful of people in an office somewhere. Like I think workers should have more control. And on the flip side, I think that there should be more public ownership, like government ownership, rather than, again, just, a handful of people in an office somewhere making decisions trying to maximize profit. But then there's that other question of markets versus planning, and there I'm a little bit more flexible. Yeah, I think planning is definitely necessary. We already live in a semi-planned economy. We don't live in a fully market-based economy now. But yeah, I mean, that competitiveness is great for generating all kinds of new stuff, and you know, it's a really powerful system. But at some point, you have to say, like, do we just keep doing this forever? You know, like, regardless of the effects on the environment and regardless of the effects on the quality of human life, or do we have to switch to a more sustainable system that doesn't create the same amount of constant economic growth, but is actually better for human well-being, all things considered?
Okay, I guess I got a gist of what your views are on that. Okay, can I ask you, like, in terms of why you don't believe in God? There are many actually good, classical theist arguments as to why God exists, but why do you think that God doesn't exist, and how would you define your atheism?
Well, so I think that when it comes to explanation, like, I think that naturalism and theism are quite often on equal footing, or that naturalism is on much better footing. So I think that the world looks about as you would expect it to look if God did not exist, and I can go into specifically why I think that. And on top of that, so it's like, naturalism, I think, is a better explanation of the data. But on top of that, naturalism is a simpler explanation than theism. So we can explain all the same things theists can explain, but we can do it with fewer tools. So those are sort of the two main reasons why I'm a naturalist, because I think that naturalism is a better explanation, both because it's simpler and because there are many, many lines of evidence that you would expect to find in a naturalistic universe, but are really, really surprising if theism turns out to be true.
Like what? Like what do you mean by things that would?
Oh, sorry.
Find?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, what do you mean by things that they would find surprising?
Okay, so divine hiddenness is a pretty stark example there, because naturalism, of course, you'd expect God to be hidden, right? There's no God, so you might expect people to believe in God, but there's not really any, like, it's not as clear that God exists as it is clear that you exist or I exist. So divine hiddenness is an absolute certainty on naturalism, but on theism it's actually pretty surprising. Like, you'd expect a God who wants to have a personal relationship with you to make it clear that he exists. Like, and I've just found, this is actually the reason I brought it up, is because this is something that's bothered me from like a young age. Like, I've only been an atheist for 6 or 7 years maybe, but it's divine hiddenness is something that's bothered me for a long time. I think it's a really powerful argument. But so as for other lines of evidence, just to give you a sense of this cumulative case that persuades me to naturalism, I think that religious and biblical confusion are more expected on naturalism. God doesn't make it clear which religious paths he wants us to take. He gave us this revelation in the form of a book, and it's totally unclear. No one knows what it means. Everyone disagrees about what it says. And, these are consequential issues. These problems of hiddenness and confusion when it comes to the Bible, or just theism generally, become a lot more persuasive and powerful depending on your views about the afterlife. If you think that atheists are going to hell, or that Hindus are going to hell or something eternally, or if you think that at least they're missing out on an eternity of bliss, these are really consequential issues. And when you factor in these arguments from biblical confusion, the fact that God's revelation has just not been understood even by people who are trying earnestly to understand it, that's expected on naturalism. You wouldn't expect people to agree about these issues because it's just like any other issue. But on theism, you'd expect some kind of consensus because, an omnipotent, omniscient God is trying to communicate his revelation to people who are desperately trying to follow him. So you'd expect this to, not be like other issues, especially considering the consequential nature of these issues, because of heaven and hell. So those are just three, but on top of that, there's also just like the gratuitous suffering we witness in our world, like animal suffering, children with cancer. There are also, so we've got different sorts of the argument from evil. We've got I just made an episode about these sort of things, and so these are the ones that are on my mind, just like divine silence during tragedies, the biological roles of pain and pleasure, or just something like evolution, where if naturalism is true, evolution pretty much has to be true. It's not like naturalists can believe in special creation or something. But if theism is true, there are more options. If you're a theist, you could believe in special creation, or you could believe in intelligent design. But evolution is a fact about our world. So that's something that is not too surprising on naturalism, but is surprising on theism. It's not in all these things I'm mentioning, like they're not incompatible with theism. It's not like these things are like logical deductive arguments that like rule out theism. They're just all very surprising. Like you wouldn't expect to find these things if there's this Christian God. There are many other examples of just lines of evidence that I think are surprising on theism, not so surprising on naturalism. And like I said, there's sort of this additional reason that, okay, so theism and naturalism can both explain the data. I think naturalism does a better job, but the point is naturalism explains all the data, and it's simpler. It's a simpler explanation of the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I guess if it doesn't have to, I guess, refer to the Christian God specifically, right? It could be a deity, or any indifferent God, right? So, but then that would explain away any like accidents or unintentionality in events like evolution or whatnot, as you have said, or divine hiddenness. So what would be your I guess your arguments against just a simple creator, or that can be still defined as God?
I guess I would lean more on the sort of Oppian like simplicity point there. Like I haven't thought as much about deism as I have about theism, but yeah, I just am not seeing any reason to be a deist. It just seems like naturalism can explain everything that deism can explain, but it just does it in a more simple way with less metaphysical baggage. Like naturalism is less metaphysically profligate than deism, and they can explain the same things. And I'm not seeing any positive arguments for deism that are persuasive.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about like the contingency argument, the ontological argument? That that the universe has to have a beginning, and then there is a necessary creator. Like, what would be your take on that, or do you still not consider that as a good argument, I guess?
Well, the thing is that whatever range of options that's open to the theist when it comes to like contingency arguments, basically the same range of options is open to me. So like, if you want to say that, there must be some kind of necessary, existence, some metaphysical necessity that is sort of at the foundation of reality or something. Or if you want to say like, no, I think that there's a brute contingency, like there is no metaphysical necessity. It's sort of like, a brute fact. Well, as a naturalist, I can take both of those positions. It's just like, so it's like if you're a theist making, the cosmological argument or something, it's like, look, I'm free to believe whatever you believe. It's just my explanation is simpler. Like you believe in a metaphysical necessity, and I can believe in a metaphysical necessity if I want to. It's just naturalism is sort of like a simpler approach to that. I can believe in a brute contingency, and so can you. Again, it's just there's nothing that you need a God to explain. Like, there's nothing that you absolutely have to invoke a god to explain something like the beginning of the universe or something like that. Like, whatever range of options is open to the theist is also open to the naturalist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, God doesn't really bring you any explanatory advantage. The only thing that's really being brought to the table here is a bunch of metaphysical baggage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, in terms of the classical theism, right, more specifically the Christian God, I guess you would have to look at the Bible, right, and actually believe the Bible in order to believe in the Christian God and Jesus Christ being the Son of God and the Trinity. So let's start with the Bible. Like what would your argument that the Bible isn't the actual word of God? How could, or what would be your argument there?
Well, again, it's like the Bible looks exactly how I'd expect it to look if it were just written by humans with no special knowledge about how the world worked. Whereas, if Christianity were true, I might expect some more interesting stuff in the Bible. Like, I might expect some more morally profound teachings other than, like, be nice to each other. Sorry, I don't want to be too reductive. I mean, the Bible is, like, it's an important cultural document. I think, like, if we were explaining ourselves to an alien civilization, then the Bible would have to be one of the books that we brought to the table. So I don't want to sound like overly reductionist about the Bible or anything, but I'm just saying that it's just not how I would expect it to look if literally an omniscient being, had something to do with its content. So, like, for instance, there's no condemnation of slavery in the Bible. There's no place where it says it is morally wrong to own another human being as personal property. It doesn't say it. I might expect it, and again, that's not like a knockdown argument against Christianity, but it's like, I would expect that to be in there if Christianity were true. And the fact that it's not in there is, expected on naturalism. You wouldn't expect, like, the moral teachings of the Bible to really go beyond, the time. So I guess the Bible's failure to condemn slavery is a pretty big tip for me, but just there are plenty of errors and contradictions in the Bible. Just wouldn't expect that. And like I said, it's just like I would expect more interesting things to be in the Bible. Like, it never says, it's wrong to own another person. It never says, like, the genders should be considered, like, legally, morally equal. I don't think it says, don't harm children, or, like, don't, like, rape, or pedophilia, I think is what I'm thinking of. There's no explicit condemnation of, like, pedophilia. It doesn't say don't harm animals in there. Like, it doesn't say that the government should derive its power from the consent of the governed. Just not really anything in there that, obviously there's no information about the physical world or the natural world that's, like, particularly profound or insightful. It doesn't say anything about like atoms or anything cool like that. And some Christians have said, like, well, why would you expect it to? It's like, well, why would you expect it not to? I mean, wouldn't you expect some cool stuff in the Bible that just no one else could know? Yeah, I mean, I would expect some prophecies maybe that would just be undeniably true. And I've, like, looked into these biblical prophecies, and they're not impressive. Like, they're not persuasive in the least. Yeah, so I guess that's why. And then just to circle back to the biblical confusion, it's like no one agrees about what this thing says. Like, there's no consensus about what the Bible teaches. And I wouldn't necessarily expect that sort of confusion if an omnipotent, omniscient God were trying to communicate his revelation to people who were earnestly trying to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I guess, overall and in general, like, in terms of how you studied the philosophy of religion, so what is your overall take on most, or I guess all religions that are man-made?
Well, I think that religion is bigger than theism, so I think that once you've argued against theism, then, you're kind of most of the way there for a lot of the world's religious believers. But, I think that, I'm not terribly informed when it comes to like the world's religions. Like I'm not terribly informed about, like Hinduism or something like that. Mostly I just know about Christianity and this peculiar form of like Christianity that exists in the United States. And, but the thing is, like, some of the things I'm saying apply across religions. But, like I said, I think that there's more to religion than just theism. I don't think that people are religious because they think it's the best explanation of cosmology. So yeah, it's not like I'm just saying we should just get rid of religion and just forget that it ever happened. Like it was just this era of like pure irrationality in the human species. Like, no, I think that there's some interesting stuff there, and it's possible, I think, to be religious without even being a theist. But yeah, I think that we should outgrow certain forms of religion. Like, I am sort of an anti-theist when it comes to like literalism, fundamentalism, or most of the types of Christianity that seem to exist in my home country. Yeah, I think many incarnations of religion are harmful, and we would be better off without. But it's not like I've learned in depth about every world religion. So I just I would want to reserve judgment until I learned more about some world religions. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about naturalism, right? Because that is your worldview. Okay, so if I'm in a naturalist reality, and everything I am is just in part of this physical reality, and there's nothing transcendent, like anything spiritual. What would you say about like human decision, accountability, and determinism? Do I have free will? And how should I think, right? And in terms of my decisions, how do you think being a naturalist, and what are the implications on free will?
Well, I think naturalism is compatible with a wide range of options on basically every issue, specifically with consciousness and free will. Free will is something I'm just now sort of getting back into. I haven't thought about it in a few years, but yeah, I think that you can take pretty much any position as a naturalist, whether you want to believe in libertarian free will, like as in there's like, there's like literally no cause to human action, like it's just everyone is just a little unmoved mover, basically. Or a compatibilist, where you think that determinism and free will are compatible. So we just sort of have a range of options that are open to us, and we can choose within that range. Even though it is cause, that's just not really the issue for compatibilists. Or you can, be a free will skeptic, which doesn't really require determinism, but, it doesn't hurt, where you just think that free will is incompatible with determinism, or just for some other reason, humans don't have free will. I used to be more on like the free will skeptic side. Like, I just thought that, free will is just kind of like God. Like it was just something that is just, we're just mistaken about how the world is in that case. But I'm sort of moving over to the more compatibilist side, because someone told me I was a compatibilist in everything but name, because I believe in like a robust sense of moral responsibility. And even though I don't like to use the term free will, I do believe in like moral, holding people accountable, like praise and blame and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know if naturalism has any implications, because I think naturalism is compatible with a range of options on free will and consciousness. And I have some unconventional views about consciousness. Like I'm an anti-physicalist, but I'm, still a naturalist. But yeah, I guess I sort of lean, these days I sort of lean compatibilist when it comes to free will. So there is moral responsibility. You can hold people responsible for their actions, even though, yeah, they are physical systems, and like, you can't make yourself the way you are. Like you have this nature, and you're not really ultimately responsible for your own nature. It's impossible, and that has nothing to do with naturalism. Like I could grant you an immaterial soul. You still can't make your immaterial soul the way it is. So you just can't have ultimate responsibility for your actions, basically, no matter what the truth turns out to be, on my view, because, and you do what you do, and I'm borrowing this argument from Galen Strawson, like, you do what you do in the circumstances in which you find yourself because of your nature, because of the way that you are. And you can have an immaterial soul, you can just be a purely physical system, it doesn't matter. You have a nature, and you do what you do in the circumstances in which you find yourself because of that nature, because of the way that you are. So in order to be ultimately responsible for what you do, you'd have to be ultimately responsible for your own nature. But, you can't get behind your own nature. You can't make adjustments to your own nature without already, sort of using the nature that you have here. Like, it's just sort of, you can't get behind it. You can't be the, like, some people say causa sui here, which is just like, you really can't be this ungenerated, self-caused entity without sort of invoking your nature that's already there. So, and it doesn't matter what your metaphysical view is here. You can't make yourself the way that you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess though it doesn't really make sense though, right? Like in terms of naturalism and moral realism, like how can you talk about more about like what moral realism is and what position you specifically take there? I guess I have to like ask what the ontology of morality is and how you specifically define it, right? We talked about it earlier, but can you, I guess, discuss more of that? And when you mention accountability and I'm sort of getting confused there. Like, how would you look at the ontology of moral realism?
Well, I think that holding people accountable is something that you could do regardless of your moral ontology, like just on purely like pragmatic grounds. You could justify like having laws and holding people accountable for what they do. Regardless of, you could be a moral nihilist and you could be in favor of that, just on purely pragmatic grounds. But I think that, I'm a moral realist, and like I said, this isn't really like my main area. And I saw that you talked to Ben Watkins a few days ago, or a week or two ago. Yeah, this is more like his area of specialty. But I think I sort of agree with him. The thing about moral philosophy with me, like specifically with meta-ethics, is that like everything that I hear sounds correct to me. Like if you like really get into like, I don't know, like expressivism or something, like 20 minutes in, I'm convinced. I'm like, yeah, this is definitely right. Like 20 minutes into like moral nihilism, I'm just like, this is definitely correct. And like, 20 minutes into someone explaining like ethical non-naturalism, I'm like, well, this is obviously the truth. So like, I don't know what it is with me, but like, I just can't seem to come down on like a meta-ethical position. Like, I just can't, like, they all sound persuasive to me. But the thing that, when I get pressed on it, I seem to just naturally fall into this moral realist, specifically like non-naturalist way of viewing it, where there are these irreducibly normative truths where, so there are these moral statements, right? Like these things about these reasons that have to do with right and wrong. And, just to take it to philosophy of religion for a second, you think about God, like when God's issuing his commands, he either has reasons for issuing those commands or he doesn't. And I think that he must have reasons, like it's not just for no reason. So if those reasons are available to him, I don't see why they shouldn't be available to us. So like, I think that ultimately God is also appealing to these, ethically non-natural, irreducibly normative truths, because I don't think he could have commanded us to murder each other. Like I don't think that that's possible, like conceivable. And I think that just has to do with these reasons that kind of exist independently of our agreeing or disagreeing about them, regardless of like if the Nazis had won or anything like that. I think there's a fact of the matter about like what's right and wrong. And the epistemology of that is a separate question. Like, moral epistemology is like, I have no clue, how we are supposed to find out these things. Like, I'm just sort of like an intuitionist about it, I guess. But I think that, there is a fact of the matter. And like I said, I think that it ultimately comes down to the experiences of conscious creatures, because I think that's where like the moral chain of reasoning has to end, right? Like, it comes down to these conscious experiences that are just good or bad, and that's it. There's no other it's like, well, hey, why is it bad to feel pain? It's like there's no explanation for why it's bad. Like, pain is bad in virtue of how it feels. There's no other explanation there's no other reason there. That's where the reasoning ends. So it's like, if you're taking a pill for your headache, right? And I'm just like, why are you taking that pill? And you say, well, because I want my headache to go away. And I say, okay, why do you want your headache to go away? That just doesn't make any sense. Like, the first question makes sense. It's like, well, why are you taking that pill? Why are you taking that action? It's like, well, because I want this headache to go away. But if I say, why do you want your headache to go away? That's a nonsensical question. We've reached the end of the chain of reasoning. So, yeah, I think there are facts of the matter here. And I think that it ultimately has something to do with the intrinsically good or intrinsically bad experiences of conscious creatures.
Okay, I guess in terms of naturalism, right? I do agree with you that it could actually mix well with some approaches in moral realism. Okay, but I guess in terms of just generally the meaning of life, there is. I don't think anyone could actually derive a proper justification for it. It's just that it's more of like an intuitional kind. I'm here and now. I'm born and I feel and I prefer well-being rather than suffering, and that's why I'm pursuing it. Right? I'm pursuing my goals and all this. But what would be your philosophy on life though? What is your motto, I guess, or how do you think about life and living? Yeah.
No, that's a good question. I mean, like, the whole wisdom side of the tradition of philosophy is like something that I'm, not as interested in, frankly. The more impractical the question, the more I'm interested in it. But yeah, I think that the meaning of life. So I have a few borderline religious texts for me here where I think you can live a meaningful life on naturalism. I don't think it's correct to say that life is meaningless on naturalism. I'm sort of sympathetic to existentialists and stuff. I think that we can create meaning. I think that meaning is it's up to us for our lives to be meaningful. If you say, well, is life meaningful on naturalism? The answer isn't yes or no. The answer is just that it depends. It depends on what you do. It could be meaningful. It might not be meaningful. It fully depends on you. You might live a meaningless life, and your failure would be inscribed on you, like Simone de Beauvoir says. Your failure to create a meaningful life would be inscribed on you and no one else, ultimately. Well, maybe not ultimately, but the point is, there is no God, telling you what you have to do or what you can't do, and there's no God ensuring that you're going to live a meaningful life either, which I suppose that's also true on theism to some extent. But anyway, I think that, well, hang on, let me name those borderline religious texts for me. The first one would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That was a really important book for me. Another one is The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. And basically anything written by Nietzsche, who I'm very ambivalent about. But I think that it's definitely possible to live a meaningful life as a naturalist. It's not easy to live a meaningful life, period. I don't think it's easy for theists or for naturalists. But I think that it's something that's ultimately up to you and dependent on your actions, which I think is a more empowering way of looking at it. But the only thing I would want to say about meaning on like naturalism versus theism really, is that I'm not sure that God adds anything to a meaningful life. Like, you know, I wouldn't find it meaningful to just go out and sit in the field and, you know, count blades of grass. You know, like that would not be a meaningful activity to me. And I don't think it would become meaningful if God told me to do it. Like if God commanded me to just sit there and count blades of grass, I'd be equally bored and think my life was equally pointless. And it's like, if God is telling me to do something, because the way I've had it explained to me by theists sometimes is like, well, look, God helps you find the things that are meaningful to you. You know, he has like a plan for your life and so on. And it's like, well, okay, but it's still, the meaning is still basically coming from me. You know, he's just like directing me towards something that I'll find meaningful, you know, and it's like, oh, thanks God, like thanks for directing me to something I find meaningful. But that's not like God generated meaning. You know, God is just helping you find a thing that you find meaningful. Like the meaning is still coming from you. You know, like what's meaningful for me would not be meaningful for you. You know, like, I mean, there's probably plenty of overlap there, but I'm saying like my perfectly fulfilled, like eudaimonic life would probably not be exactly the same as yours. You know, and I think that's true whether you're a theist or a naturalist. And I just don't really see what God does for you. I mean, like, there are some differences, you know, like if you believe in an eternity, you know, in an afterlife, then your actions have potentially eternal consequences, you know. So that's a more meaningful life, I would say, than what naturalists can really offer you, because what you're doing is not going to have eternal significance. You know, like humanity will someday be gone. But that doesn't really, I don't really care that much about it. I mean, in some ways it's kind of comforting, and in other ways it's kind of like, who cares? Like, it's just like, do you really, I mean, come on, like, does it actually bother you that, like, you know, a trillion years from now nothing you do will matter? Like, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, like, how could I possibly say that, like, you know, if I help someone and someone says, well, you know, in a trillion years, you know, there will be no record of this or something. It's like, well, who cares? Like, it's meaningful right now. And you know, I mean, maybe I'm just easier to please than other people, but yeah, my life feels basically equally meaningful, you know, now as when I was a theist.
Yeah, okay. In terms of like, you know, like the direction you have for your life right now, right? And I guess, you know, being kids, you know, we had all these dreams to be this and that. But right now, like, in terms of happiness and in the pursuit of it, like, where are you right now? And are you already living the dream, or are you still pursuing it? And what do you think people should do about it? You know, like, if sometimes, you know, if it's impossible or it's really far away, what is your philosophy on that?
I would not describe myself as living the dream at the moment. But no, things are relatively good right now, actually. I would say I'm happier now than I have been in like years. Just definitely more satisfied. I guess my work life is not overbearing and immiserating like it has been for my entire adult life. It's been less so recently. I think that's a huge part of it. Like, I think that's part of why I'm a socialist, because I think so many of our neuroses stem from our lives at work and, you know, our material conditions. And so yeah, I think if you want to help people, you know, there are a couple things you can do. I mean, you can kind of give them this empowering, like, individualist way of saying, like, look, your life is in your hands, you know, and that's definitely empowering, and it causes people to take action when they otherwise might not have. You know, that's a good thing. But it's also just like, it's not true that everything is fully like in your hands. I think that there are forces much bigger than individuals at work. And if you want to improve life for people, then, you know, you've got to improve those material conditions. I think all kinds of societal neuroses come from poor material conditions or declining material conditions. But I don't know. I don't. The question was how do I get to? I'm sorry. What was your question again?
I guess like are you still pursuing happiness or like your
Oh yeah,
dreams?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still pursuing happiness. I mean, like the thing that I'm working towards right now is I'm just like an electrician's apprentice, and I'm just working towards eventually becoming like a journeyman electrician, maybe owning my own business, and then I can perhaps experiment with different ways of organizing a business. But that's in the far future. But I guess that, and my wife is we just got married like a couple months ago, and she's going to University of Michigan right now for nuclear engineering. So right now she's just going to school full time, and I'm like working full time to support the both of us, because I didn't want her to have to, like work and go to school. But that's what we're doing right now, and we have this pretty nice apartment to ourselves, and yeah, I think that that's kind of what I'm pursuing right now, is just sort of like a better work life. Because like I said, so many of my problems have always stemmed from a bad work life. A few different things. But yeah, that's so I feel like I'm pursuing it. But the thing is, like, just being on a path that sort of makes sense does, contribute a lot to your sense of satisfaction, where it's like I'm not just kind of aimlessly wandering from shitty job to shitty job like I have been my adult life until now. So yeah, like I feel like I'm on a definite path to pursuing happiness, and the thing that I feel like got me there is the fact that my wife and I are both on sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it career paths, but we're sort of making definite improvements in our like work life, I guess. Yeah, so I guess that would be my answer to that.
Awesome. Well, hey man, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it, bro. I hope you have a great day.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun talking to you.
Yeah.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
Care has the power to bring kindness where it's needed. It brings out the best in every one of us. It doesn't just see people. It takes time to understand them. It puts the needs of others ahead of its own. And when you start with care, you end up with a very different kind of bank. Truist. Truist Bank, member FDIC.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.